Hey guys, Anthony, 4x4 Diesel. This video is going to be another quick one. It's almost funny again. I accidentally say that. It's just a habit, you know, the habit of going, oh, you know, just a quick one. Well, it's kind of like I had a quick thought, but I'll tell you what, there's so much information and depth that goes with every thought, isn't there? Like this one, and it's going to be called something like the top, I don't know how many yet, the top 4 or 5 modifications or upgrades, and we've done something similar, but it wasn't quite like this, and it might not be the same things. If you know about it, you can go and compare to it and see if it's got the same sort of items. But look, I think it's the top, around about 5. We'll see what I think of. The top 5, we'll try and come up with the top 5 modifications or upgrades that you don't need. Okay, so waste of money, you don't need them, it's just a waste of money, less is more. We'll go in a little bit into the evidence as to why you don't need them. Obviously, just my opinion from my experience, working on Prados every day, working on vehicles for decades and traveling the outback in the Prados here. So, look, just randomly, we'll start off with, we're looking at the engine bay, so I can obviously point out, you know, where the items may go. So let's start off with fuel filter. Okay, fuel filter. Okay, so here's your standard fuel filter that's under the bonnet. There's another one on the Prado, the dual tank system. There's another one underneath. They're kind of pre-filters most of the fuel that comes up here. There's a constant flow, right? So, extra fuel filter. Some people have got an extra fuel filter. Some have got it over this side here. Some have got it over that side there. And we've already talked about when people put it over that side, the hoses going back and forth, how they get hot and they're rubbing. Also over here, so this bracket here, that's strong enough for that filter, but when you add the weight of another bracket and another filter and the leverage from the weight of those brackets, it's not really good enough to just add it onto this bracket, in my opinion, of course, just my opinion. So as far as the bracket works go, it can cause some problems with cracking, tearing the guard here, which we've seen before. That's one reason. The main reason we say you don't need it or it's a waste of money is because we see vehicles that are old, with heaps of kilometres, and they don't have the extra fuel filters and they're going fine. We see vehicles that have got the extra fuel filters that have problems. So, and not just problems caused by the extra filters, like the stalling and the hard to start problems, and the, you know, the aftermarket brackets that tear the guards and the hoses that running in the wrong places. Let's say you got it all perfect and you chose the right micron, and it wouldn't be a 2 micron, it would be about 5, about the same as this. You just got 2 filters. Now, of course it's going to clean the fuel a bit better, but that's a lot of fuel going through there to make a small difference. There's guys that worked in Toyota dealerships that agree that, you know, they say the key with a lot of these engines is the maintenance. Well, of course maintenance is the key, but there is some maintenance that it's not really part of the schedule, and that's what we talk about in our videos, which is why it's important to watch those. So without going into too much detail, there's vehicles with extra fuel filters. We get the old injectors back, right? So we sell and supply the injector kits to hundreds and thousands of people, and we get the old injectors back for a free contamination check, strip them down, we look at the command piston, and I have vehicles, not many have got contamination, but about every second one, they've got the extra fuel filter there anyway. So the water gets through filters, so it's not doing anything for you. So that's my point. You don't need it. It's not going to stop a problem, and it's a waste of money, and it can cause a problem. So that's number one. We don't want to go too much into detail. Like I said, that's 4 minutes on number one. That's going to make if it's 5 minutes, it's going to make a 20-minute video. So I've got to get on with it. So you're not a quick one. Okay. Of course, number 2 can be the dreaded catch can. You know, I mean, catch can, fuel filters are a much better option than a catch can. A catch can, oh, look, you know, I mean, you can have one if you want. And this is the deal. I mean, I understand that each to their own, everyone's different, depends where you are. Sometimes in some vehicles, you know, if you haven't got a choice, maybe that extra fuel filter is what is going to help you. So in some circumstances, it may help, okay? Let's not too much detail in going into which ones, but the catch can thing, right? Let's just imagine, well, where's the room for the catch can? We're going to put a catch can somewhere. Catch can, we need a catch can. You know, you don't need a catch can, okay? The catch can reduces the amount of oil. So the engine's got a ventilation system, crankcase ventilation, positive crankcase ventilation, whatever you want to call it. It takes some of the oil out of what goes back into the intake. Now there's not much oil in the intake because that comes from your sump and your engine's not using oil, so there's not much oil in your intake. But the catch can, if it's really restrictive, right? Which means it stops your crankcase ventilation from working so well, which means dirty engine, dirty oil. If it works really well, then it will stop the soot sticking in your intake or reduce it, okay? So that's where people think you need it. The problem is a lot of them don't work that well, and they don't do their job, and they don't make it stick, which is good because that allows the crankcase ventilation system to do its job. So you just need to understand those systems, which we've explained more in other videos, so we're not going to go into it too much. Same thing with the brackets and stuff, wobbly brackets, rubbing on air boxes. Quite often there's a catch can bracket that's, you know, over here in this corner, rubbing around, and, you know, on the 1kDs, the hoses go over there, and, you know, it's just a mess. You know, waste of money. You spend $100 on something you don't need that may cause the inside of your engine to end up a bit dirtier than it was if it's too restrictive, okay? Let's be clear, there's a filter there. It needs to flow, okay? If it's not flowing, it will cause problems, okay? So it's simple as that. You can end up with crankcase pressure. That's pressure, just think of it, pressure in your engine, and popping seals and causing oil leaks and stuff like that, okay? So that's number 2, without going into too much detail. If you want the detail, like I said, it's a big jigsaw puzzle, 1,000,000 pieces. You've got about, I don't know, you've got a few of them at the moment. You've got a few hundred pieces only, right? You need to get all those pieces before you can even make a start. Number 3, let's go for the auto transcooler. So, you know, all these 5 things, there's going to be people with a different opinion going, oh yeah, you do need it. So I'm just going to quickly tell you why you don't need a transcooler, okay? Because it's a band-aid. It's just trying to cover up the real problem. You know what I mean? It's like you've got a water pipe leaking and you just keep pouring more dirt and sand over the top trying to hide it. It's still there. It's hidden underneath. You know what I mean? You've got to dig, you've got to find the leak, and you've got to stop the pressure. You've got to clean it, dry it, seal it, reseal it, replace the bit of pipe, and then you bury it, and then your problem's solved, right? So with the transmission, if it's getting too hot, there's a reason why. I've explained in other videos. The torque converter is what makes the heat. 2 things make the heat. One's the torque converter, it's slipping. It's like your automatic clutch, to put it in simple terms. That's what makes the heat. That's the majority of making the heat. Now, they don't want it to run cold. They don't want it to run at 40, 50 or 60. That's why they run it through the radiator. Through the coolant, there's a tank in the radiator that the transmission oil goes through, and that warms it up to the normal operating temperature in the 80-degree range, right? After all, coolant is, you know, about 83, 85 usually in these engines and the 1kDs. So we don't want it to run cold. As I've explained, like the thermostat in the engine, to get the coolant up to normal operating temperature. It's not run around cold, mate. Not ideal. Not going to happen. Not going to last, okay? It could be detrimental by running it cold. That's why if you've got an auto cooler, in some conditions, it's important to have a flap or something in front of it. Cover it up for winter so that it can warm up and get up to temperature. Maybe when you're not towing and you're down south, and then if you're towing a lot. But look, this is why you don't need it, because if you manage your transmission, and the 1kD with the 5-speed is really easy to manage that transmission, keep the converter locked, drive right so that you get the best fuel economy. No, the transmission doesn't pick the right gears all the time. No, you can do better. In the 1kD with a 5-speed auto, if you're driving around in fifth towing, you're going to be slipping fifth a lot, you're going to be cooking the transmission oil. If the sort of people that say that, they're just not watching the videos, or they don't watch the whole video and they don't quite get it, you know what I mean? So 4th gear's for towing, and 4th gear will keep the converter locked under most conditions, mate. All your towing, your 80, 90, 100 Ks, even 70 and 60 will do pretty well. If you're going up a really steep hill, then that's where your torque converter is going to be slipping. It's going to get hot. Just because it gets hot once or once a week or once a month doesn't mean that's the end of the transmission, or even that's the end of the oil. It just means the oil's got hotter. As it's hotter, it oxidizes faster. It's not going to last as long. The protection that's in the oil isn't going to be there. So what's important is oil changes and understanding how the transmission works and keeping that torque converter locked. Now, this 1GD here with a 6-speed auto behind it, you know, it's really difficult. It's super difficult to keep the torque converter locked in 5th and 6th gear. I'll tell you straight, okay? The vehicle's done 25,000 Ks. As soon as you go over about 100 Ks, because of the wind resistance you've got, torque converter in 5th and 6th wants to unlock. It really just wants to unlock. You have to be going downhill. If you're doing 90 Ks, flat ground, no headwind, it'll lock in 6th. You know, it won't lock in 5th because, you know, it will lock in 5th, but, you know, it wants to go, you got to back off, it'll go to 6th gear, right? Which is a bit, you know, I don't want to go into explaining the transmission operation too much, but that's number 3. The auto cooler, you don't need it. Now, by all means, if you want one, and you want the best one and the best brackets, then K on other people for that. They've got these awesome brackets, like this one here, which we'll get to. Stainless steel bracket, mounts in the front here. that quality trans cooler kit they supply with the bracket. It's easy to install. You just take this cover off here. This is not an installation video, and you bang it in down there. If you want one, or if it's for you, if you live in the north end of Australia or we're in a hot climate and you're towing every day, I'd still suggest even in a hot climate you can get torque converter lock-in forth and you don't need it. It's flat ground, right? The sort of place you'd need it is if you lived in, let's say you lived in, let me think of a place. You lived in Bright. There you go. You live in Bright and you worked in, you worked at Mount Hotham or yeah, one of those places up the hill anyway. And you're driving up and down there every day, 365 days a year. That's someone that wants an auto cooler because it's going to help keep it cooler. There's not much else you can do. You can drive right. It's not, look, you don't have, doesn't mean you've got to have one. What it means is it's going to help keep the temps down a little bit, okay? But if you're in really hot temps and that, and you've got hot air going through, it's not going to make a massive difference. The thing is, you know, they make the biggest difference in that mid-range, and the problem is when it's cold, it keeps it cold. So I'm not trying to sell you or unsell you any of these things. I'm just giving you advice, things you don't need. You don't need a trans cooler. It's going to make it less reliable if your connections aren't right. If your hoses, the quality of the hoses and connections and everything isn't as good or better than the genuine Toyota vehicle, you're going to make it less reliable than it was when you got it. So you've got to ask yourself, is it worth it? And you're paying money and putting time out there to do that, to make it less reliable, perhaps, okay? The K-on brackets are awesome. If you want an auto cooler, you know where to get one. Right. While we're looking at it here, the dcdc charger. This is probably, again, in the top 5 modifications and things you don't need. Now, certainly you need a dual battery if you're going to be touring and you have a fridge. Well, you don't need one. You can get away without it, but it's going to be a pain trying to run a fridge off one battery and keep that charging, whatever. So that word need, it's a pretty open thing. I'll say that if you're touring and you've got an extra fridge, you do need a dual battery system. And there's different ways to charge it. And personally, I will say all you need is, and I definitely prefer a basic, reliable, voltage sensitive relay, VSR, right? Basically, it's a switch that detects the voltage of this main battery. When the voltage reaches X, let's say, I don't know, it should probably just be 13, you know, but it's probably 13.3, something like that, right? That's fine. It then connects, it says yes, and it connects to your other battery, so they're both charging. And this alternator on these vehicles and all the other vehicles, they're quite capable in most vehicles. This is, you know, on the Prados and the Toyotas, and, you know, everything varies a little bit. And this whole thing started years ago where people said, oh, you know, variable voltage alternators and all this, and they charge low and all that. On these vehicles, they don't actually do that, you know. This alternator, they stay up to about 13.7, 13.8 all the time. That will charge both the batteries, and you can get that voltage booster diode, right? Some people don't like those, whatever. We know hundreds of people with them that have used them for years, no problem. That boosts it up by about 0.5 volt. That's what we run in the 120 Prado. It's been reliable for, yeah, I don't know, over 6 years or something now. So, bada bing. So that's reliable because then you can easily use that little wire to connect the 2 batteries together. If you happen to have a problem with this battery, it falls apart, then you can use that one to start the car. If you have an alternator fail or something, when this one goes flat, you can connect it and use the other one to run the car to get closer or get to where you can get some help and get some repairs. With this DC-DC charger system, it's a little bit more complex. There's more wires. You don't have to, but you, without going into that detail too much here, that you should run, you know, ignition switches here, there. There's quite a few wires. What these are really good for, that's the projector one, and you've also got the Red Arc, what's it called, the 1225, whatever it is, that's the one, the 25 amp charger anyway. Whichever one you like, the Red Arc one, they say Australian made, probably a lot of imported components anyway, but you know, try and buy Australian where you can. This is the projector one. They both do pretty well, similar jobs, similar wires. They both fit on the same bracket from K-on. Absolutely, that is the place to mount it, and that's the bracket. The K-on bracket is gun if you want one, but I'm here to tell you that you don't need one, okay? So if you want one, you definitely should have this K-on bracket, but you don't need one. So there's cheaper options, the basic relay with the 1kd, and the you know, voltage booster die that goes in the relay box over here. Just replaces the fuse. It's still fused, it's still perfectly safe. They tell us, and it's proven so far with everyone we know running them in Prados, no problem. So you don't need that. Now, why am I saying you don't need it? Well, not only, again, you're spending money on these expensive things, spending the time, paying the money or doing the installation, and then what do you find? You got an alternator pumping out 13.8 here, and really quickly, unless there's a draw on that battery, this charger, for example, drops it down to, I don't know, what are the 3 stages of charge they call it? You know, you got bulk and you've got what, and I don't know. Look, the first stage when you start the car, it's really boosting it. It's up around 14.5 volts. That's good. We like that. I would like it to stay like that for at least 2 hours. Anyway, the next level is it drops down to about 13.4, 13.5 volts, and it happens after about 5 minutes, which is not good enough, to be honest. In my opinion and my experience, this battery, and I can't really give you an honest comparison of this battery compared to an Optima because I haven't got the same charging system, right? So this is the problem. But in my opinion, watching the voltage I get from the alternator, from that battery, the charging system, and then that goes through this unit here and that unit to there, I'm not impressed. The voltage that I got at the end of the day, not that exciting, drops down pretty quickly. Maybe that's a characteristic of this battery. Don't get me wrong, I think these batteries are really good still, and it does still stay up overnight. We're talking pretty cool weather, but overnight it was still, what, 12.6 the next day sort of thing, so that's all right, but it definitely needs more punishment to be able to give you you know, to give you an idea whether we're happy with that battery or not compared to the Optimas, the comparison thing. We probably even need to get one of those into the 120 and an Optima in here. Maybe we need to swap the 2 batteries around. That'd be a good way to do it, wouldn't it? So the point of this video is not needed. You don't think because someone on the internet said, oh, you gotta have a dc-dc charger, or you gotta have a C-Tech, or you gotta have a Red Arc, or I still disagree with that. I've never agreed that you need one of those. Now, some circumstances, they're going to be handy, like if you've got to run it a long way. You don't have to use massive wires to power this unit up. I can't remember what the specs are, so I'm not going to try and tell you, but you've still got to use a half decent sized wire, but you know, probably something that looks like about that, right? Can you see that here? No, kind of, right? You still got to use something like that, right? Then maybe a bit smaller you can get away with. Anyway, but the point is, if you've got a caravan or something, you've got a couple of big batteries in there, because of the distance thing, that's where you probably need to use a DC-DC charger. In the back of the vehicle, I still don't think you know. The vehicle's only 5 meters long, just under technically. So to get from a battery to where you need to go at the back, it's probably a 4 meter run. Let's just say 5 anyway. If you use the right cable, you're certainly not going to get the voltage drop that's going to cause you any issues. Yeah, I've got experience with this. I've had camper trail, etc., where there was a battery in there, and we ran a cable direct down under the vehicle, and there was some questions recently, so I'll just cover that. Yes, you can run a wire directly from this battery or that battery, whatever. If you've got this one or some setup charging that battery, you can run a cable direct to the back. You should always have a fuse here, like this sort of setup here. Hey, you don't have to. If you're 100% sure that's not going to rub on anything and you've got corrugated split tubing over it and you want to save money on a fuse and some connections, go ahead. Make sure it's not rubbing anywhere and make sure you've got that insurance policy, this black stuff here, over the top. But the smartest way you can do it, this wire, all my positive wires are covered like that one right there. The only reason this one isn't is because obviously that's not going to touch anything. And that one, the corrugated split tubing, it literally, it's actually twin. See this wire? It's a twin, and it's got a cover over it. So this one actually hasn't got split tubing because it's double insulated. It's got another cover over it which finishes right about there. But not too much detail on this, right? Top 5 things you don't need. And what's the last one? The 5th thing that I can think of off the top of my head that I'm sick of people seeing post about, and I'm just going, another waste of money, more Chinese junk, you know, sorry, but with all, you know, with a lot of these things, that's the way I see it. Now, as I said, with the exception of the Australian-made, top quality K-on design, engineering and manufacture made in Australia. The rest of it, I just go, oh, you know, so Diff Breathers, you know, hang on a minute. So look, on the Prados, the front diff breather, it's already up relatively high, you know, it's just, you know, usually just about there somewhere. I'm not going to go digging around and find it. It's just there. The transmission one, it's up behind, it's up the top of the bell housing behind the engine. So if you're going through some water, it's up quite high, you know, you've done something severely wrong. It's a touring vehicle, it's a Prado. It's not some, you know, if you're going to try and build a bush basher, if you're going to try and build a patrol out of a Prado, then you probably need all these things, right? Because you just highly modified the vehicle. It's no longer a reliable Toyota Prado anymore. It's whatever you've made it to be. But if you've got a Prado that you want to keep reliable, The rear diff, same thing, you know, on the 120, mate, it's done river crossings all its life, Prados before that, Hiluxes before that, whatever you like, right? Never ever saw water in any of those diffs. We work on these vehicles. Heaps of cars haven't got diff breathers, and we don't see water in diffs. With the exception of the one that I always mention, there was one with a heap of water in there. I don't know what he was doing. We can have a laugh about that every time. If you're watching this video and you know who you are, you know who you are. But anyway, it's all good. So they're the top 5 things you don't need. Waste of money. Stop buying them unless you really think your circumstances are different. And you need them, of course. General advice for most people, a lot of people need this advice. They haven't really, you know, they don't really know or understand why. They just go, this is the problem. People just go with the flow. Get on Facebook, oh, I've got a Prado. What do I need? What are the top mods I need? Okay, so we've probably done the top things you do need, and we won't do that in this video. I might just quickly mention it. So the top 5 things you don't need are an extra fuel filter, a catch can, an auto cooler, a DC charger, some diff breathers, okay? They're your top 5 things you don't need. Okay. Fuel filter, if you lived in a really bad place where you would definitely knew you were putting bad fuel in, you know, I'd get some other filtration system. I'd use an external, some sort of external filter before it even went into the tank. If you knew that you were going to get bad fuel or regularly get contaminated fuel, check it before it goes in is what I'd be doing. Catch can, yep, you just don't need it. Plastic junk. Auto cooler. Look, I like the idea of an auto cooler if you're doing a lot of towing and you're up the north side of Queensland. I do like the idea of that, but it's not something you need. Don't jump on and go, that's the first thing I need. You can have a 1KD loaded up to 3 tonne of 150 Prado with a 2.5 tonne caravan. I'm not recommending this. You can be 5.5 tonne and drive around Australia. It's flat ground in 4th gear. Keep your torque converter locked and keep it under 90 to 95 degrees. I could do that. I'll put my money on it, right? The worst places are going to be on the hottest days in the hilly areas. Generally the hottest days, you know what, you need to be parked somewhere and going for a swim. You're in a river or a lake somewhere, you know what I mean? You know, if you're up the Kimberleys, you're not going to be up there in summer anyway, right? So in winter it's 30. Again, flat ground. Just keep that torque converter locked. Don't use cruise control. Drive with your foot. As you come towards the hill, just back off a little bit to keep it locked. When you go down the next hill, you just give it a little bit extra and get towards the speed limit. When you come to the next hill, just let it back. It's going to save you fuel. It's going to save your transmission. It's going to keep the vehicle reliable. Okay, the dcdc charger. Look, I love it in theory. I love the bracket. I just got to say, I really love that bracket. And there's a fuse. I tell you, what I didn't tell you what's good about a dcdc charger, really awesome for solar input, okay? So that's what it's good for. If you want to have a setup, and I'm not suggesting you go and put solar panels on the roof of your car permanently because you're going to be parked in the shade where you should be, otherwise the sun's going to wreck the rest of your car, except for when you're using it. When you're away, you're going to have swags and other gear up there. Well, how's that going to work for your solar panels, right? So not a good idea, but they work really well, the solar input, that regulator there, right? And as I've probably shown you in other videos before, I haven't used it for a while, but here it is right here. There's our solar input. See, it sits right there, ready to go. Bada bing, bada boom. And that is what that's all about right there, right? So solar input, it's good. Best of both worlds is probably to have both, eh? You know, you could, I don't know if you can just double up. I don't see why not. I don't know how that'd, if they'd mess with each other. If you had an SB112, you know, and that connected and it was charging from the alternator and it was charging through that at the same time. I don't know how that'd go. Or you could just have one or the other. I don't know. Look, all I know is I like the simple VSR. It's reliable. The Red Arc one, heaps of vehicles have got them. That's what they run, and their batteries work well. Nobody's going, oh, my battery's going flat, it didn't charge. And no, that's not happening. But I do see people bagging some brands of batteries, and I know that they've got DC chargers. So I hope it's not the lousy charge you seem to, you know, I'm using the word lousy, maybe I'm going a bit overboard. I'm not impressed with the fact that you start up the car, bang, 14.4, 14.5 volts, that's good. And within a few minutes, it's down to 13.5, okay? It really needs a good bang solid charge. Now, if you're driving all day, no problem, I get it. You know, 8 hours of that, that'll be fine. But what if you're only driving an hour or two? I want it to boost hard and charge that battery in the half an hour or the hour or the 2 hours that I'm going to be driving that day. I don't want it pedaling around at 13.4 volts. So I don't know, if projector watch this video, there's a bit of information for you. Yeah, I don't know, it needs to go longer on that first setting, or the next stage needs to drop. You want it to drop down? drop it down to 13.9, not 13.4. Somewhere in between, please. So first level, bang, 14.5, beautiful. Next level, around the 14, just under. And then after 2 hours, you can go to the next level, about 13.5. Happy days, okay? I'm not the auto electronics engineer, I just see what works and make common sense of it, because there isn't much common sense around. There you go, guys, that's long enough. We said 20 minutes, it's 25 already. Top 5 things that you don't need on your touring Prado: fuel filter, catch can, auto cooler, dcdc charger, and Diff Breathers. Of course, if you like spending money and playing with cars, you want to go ahead and put them on, go ahead. I'm just advising people in general and trying to give a little bit of explanation as to why. And if you need more info, make sure you go and watch all the other videos that are already on the channel, because the information is there in further detail. Top 4 modifications you probably do need for a Prado. You go and got yourself a new or second-hand Prado, it's fairly stock standard. What do you do? Well, it depends what you're going to use the vehicle for. But I'm sorry if I got you excited, because that's another video. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, turn that bell on so you don't miss that notification for when that 4 or 5 best 4-wheel drive modifications video comes along. Give us a thumbs up if you definitely got some awesome information out of that. And I'll be looking at the comments for ideas on the next videos. Bada bing. Catch you guys.